I shouldn't be telling you this. In fact, if I had any sense left at all, I'd shut my mouth, delete every file on my computer, and pretend none of this ever happened. But I can't. Not because I want to warn you, though maybe that's part of it. No, mainly because once you've seen what I've seen, silence isn't possible. It claws at you from the inside, tearing at your throat until the words spill out, whether anyone believes them or not. This isn't some internet rumor, not one of those creepypasta campfire stories people pass around for cheap thrills. I wish it were. I found something real, something that was never meant to be watched by anyone outside the people who made it. And even they, well, let's just say I doubt they slept easy afterward. It was a cartoon. A cartoon you've definitely heard of, one you probably grew up with, the kind of show parents trusted because it seemed harmless, silly, safe. Saturday morning, bowl of cereal, pajamas on the couch, innocence wrapped in bright colors and catchy theme songs. That's what it was supposed to be. That's what it still is, for most people. But I stumbled onto something different. Something hidden. There's an episode that shouldn't exist. And before you think I'm exaggerating, let me make one thing clear. No one who's watched it has come back the same. Some people vanish from forums after claiming they found it. Others, well, I've read the accounts, and I can tell when someone's sanity is slipping through their fingertips. What I saw, it wasn't just disturbing. It wasn't just some edgy animator slipping in dark humor where kids wouldn't notice. No, this felt alive. It felt like the episode was watching me back. Like every distorted frame, every lingering note of warped laughter was designed to crawl under my skin and nest there. And now that I've spoken it out loud, you'll probably want to know everything. You'll think you're ready. You're not. But I'll tell you anyway, because pretending I can keep this secret is a lie. Let me start from the beginning. When I was a kid, my world was small but perfect. My mornings didn't begin with the smell of coffee or the buzzing of alarms. No, they started with the glow of the television screen. I'd shuffle into the living room in oversized pajamas, bowl of cereal practically drowning in sugar, and plop down on the couch like it was my throne. The house would still be quiet, the sun barely up, and there I'd sit, hypnotized by brightly colored characters bouncing across the screen. Everyone had their show, the one that felt like a friend who never let you down. For me, it was this one cartoon. I won't say the name yet, though you've definitely heard it. It was silly, loud, ridiculous in every way. The kind of thing adults rolled their eyes at but secretly knew was shaping an entire generation. I memorized the catchphrases. I mimicked the voices at school until my teachers begged me to stop. I even got in trouble once for doodling the main character on a math test instead of solving the problems. To be fair, he looked better in a cape than Fractions ever did. Those were safe years. The cartoon was my escape hatch from everything scary or boring about real life. No matter how bad a day went, I knew I'd laugh again when the theme song blared through the speakers. The characters never changed. The world inside the show stayed the same. It felt eternal. But even back then, there were whispers. Little things kids would say on the playground, rumors that spread faster than candy wrappers. Someone always claimed they'd seen an episode where something bad happened, where the characters did things they weren't supposed to do. A friend of a friend said his cousin had a VHS tape the network pulled after one airing. Another swore the animators slipped in frames you could only catch if you paused at the right moment. We'd huddle in circles, wide-eyed, trading secrets none of us could prove. Of course, I laughed it off. Adults said it was just urban legends for kids. And maybe it was. But those rumors had a way of sticking in my head. Sometimes, late at night, I'd replay the episodes I knew by heart and wonder, what if there really was something hidden between the jokes and pratfalls? What if the world I trusted wasn't as harmless as I thought? Years passed, and I grew up. The cartoon never really left me, though. I collected DVDs when they went on sale. I joined forums where fans argued about which season was the best. I even hunted down production sketches and storyboards on eBay when I could afford them. Some people drink, some people gamble. I chased nostalgia. It's funny how we cling to the things that made us feel safe as kids. Maybe I was just trying to freeze time, to hold on to something that felt unbreakable. But I couldn't shake those whispers. The older I got, the more I noticed gaps in the show's history. Production notes that didn't add up. Early promos that mentioned episodes nobody could find. Interviews where creators dodged questions like they'd touched a live wire. I told myself it was nothing, but deep down, I wanted it to be something. I wanted there to be truth in those old playground rumors, some dark secret hidden under the laughter. And, God help me, I got what I wanted. It wasn't until last year that I stumbled onto something I never should have seen. It happened on a Saturday, one of those restless afternoons where I had nothing better to do than wander through the clutter of a flea market on the edge of town. The place was a graveyard of forgotten junk, cracked porcelain dolls, rusted tools, bins of tangled cords that hadn't powered anything in decades. It smelled faintly of dust and mildew, like the air itself hadn't moved in years. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I never was. Half the fun came from digging through the trash, hoping to find something that didn't belong. That's when I saw it. Buried under a pile of old board games and water-damaged comic books was a cardboard box full of VHS tapes. Most were unremarkable, recordings of sitcom reruns, taped over football games, movies that hadn't aged well. But one stood out immediately. The label was faded to near illegibility, scrawled handwriting on peeling white tape. The letters were jagged, uneven, as though whoever wrote them had done so in a hurry, or maybe with shaking hands. I pulled it out and turned it over in my hands. No artwork, no official branding. Just that one word in black marker, the title of my favorite cartoon. Except, there was no episode listed. No season number. Nothing to identify it at all. Just the name. Something about it felt wrong. Like the tape didn't want to be found, yet it had been waiting there, in that box, just for me. The man running the booth noticed me holding it. He was old, with a face as wrinkled as the leather jacket he wore. When I asked if the tape worked, he just smirked, showing teeth that looked like they'd been ground down to nubs. "It works," he said, voice low. "But you won't like it." I laughed nervously, trying to play it off as part of the flea market theatrics. Still, his words clung to me like cobwebs. I asked where he got it, and he only shrugged. People leave things behind. They always do. I should have put it back. I should have walked away. But curiosity, that gnawing hunger that gets us into trouble, took over. I paid him a few crumpled bills, shoved the tape in my backpack, and told myself it was probably just some recorded rerun. When I got home, I noticed more details I'd missed in the crowded market. The tape was heavier than it should have been, the plastic slightly warped like it had been left too close to heat. There were faint scratches along the casing, not random ones, but deliberate lines carved into the surface, almost like symbols. My stomach nodded when I realized I recognized one of them. It matched a doodle I'd seen in an old production sketch online, something the animators used as an inside joke. On the back, someone had written 3 words in faded ink: "Do not watch." That should have been the end of it. That should have been enough to make me snap the cassette in half and forget the whole thing. But the warning only made it worse. Why would anyone go through the trouble of labeling it like that? Who were they trying to keep away? And why did I feel like it was meant for me specifically? I tried to find information online. I scoured the fan forums, the obscure lost media threads, even the darker corners of the internet where people traded rumors like currency. Nobody mentioned a tape like this. The closest I came was a half-deleted post on a message board that claimed episodes existed, the network buried for good reason. The user's account had been banned, their post scrubbed, except for a fragment that stuck with me. "Destroy the copy before it plays itself." Plays itself. The phrase rang in my ears long after I closed the browser. I left the tape sitting on my desk for days, convincing myself I wasn't going to watch it. Every time I walked past, though, I could feel its presence. I'd catch myself staring at it without realizing, drawn to it like gravity. I even dreamed about it once. Dreams where the tape was in the VCR, already rolling, and I couldn't stop it no matter how hard I tried. By the end of the week, resistance had worn me down. I told myself I'd watch just a few minutes, just enough to satisfy the itch and prove it was nothing more than a recorded rerun some paranoid collector had scribbled warnings on. So I set the tape beside the VCR. I closed the blinds, turned off the lights, and sat alone in the quiet hum of my living room. And then, at night, I pressed play.at first. Everything looked normal. The screen flickered with that familiar studio logo, grainy but recognizable, accompanied by the cheerful little jingle I'd heard 1,000 times before. For a split second, relief washed over me. Maybe it was just a rerun after all. Maybe all those warnings were just some collector's twisted idea of a joke. The theme song kicked in, the one that used to blast me awake before school, and I almost smiled. Almost. But something was off. The melody was slower, just enough that it dragged, like the tape was warping under the weight of time. The voices of the characters sang along, but they were pitched wrong, too deep and sluggish, like someone had recorded them underwater. I told myself it was just the tape degrading, just old VHS quality. But the unease had already started to creep in. The episode opened on a familiar scene. The main character waking up in his cartoonish little house, birds chirping outside the window, the kind of light-hearted start I remembered so well. But the colors weren't right. Everything was muted, drained, as though someone had pulled a gray filter across the whole world. The cheerful yellows and blues I remembered from childhood were dulled into something sickly, unnatural. I leaned closer, squinting. That was when I noticed the first anomaly. The main character's eyes lingered on the screen too long. In the original show, he'd glance at the audience for a quick gag before bouncing back into action. Here, though, his eyes locked on the viewer, on me. And they didn't move. For several long seconds, the smile stayed plastered on his face while his pupils stared straight through the screen. The sound of the birds outside slowed, warped into something like distorted static, and then, just as suddenly, it all snapped back into place. I actually laughed out loud, nervous and shaky. Probably just an animation error, I thought. Old shows were full of them. Little mistakes nobody cared to fix. That's all it was. Except it kept happening. A background detail here. A frame held too long there. Once, in the middle of a scene, I spotted something standing in a doorway, something tall and featureless, just for a flicker of a second before the frame cut away. I rewound, heart pounding, but when I played it again, the doorway was empty. Another time, one of the side characters spoke, but their voice wasn't their own. It was deeper, rougher, like an adult clearing his throat. It didn't match the movement of the character's mouth, either. It was just layered on top, like someone had spliced in the wrong audio track. The laugh track, too, was wrong. It came in at moments that weren't jokes, when a character tripped, when someone fell silent, when the main character sat still and said nothing. The laughter sounded less like children and more like static broken into rhythm, sharp and grating. I started jotting notes without realizing it. I'd grabbed a scrap of paper from my desk and began scribbling down every oddity, like I was cataloging evidence. I told myself I'd compare it later to other episodes, maybe post online and see if anyone else noticed the same things. But as I watched, the sense of unease grew heavier. The characters' expressions began to change in ways I couldn't dismiss as tape damage. Their smiles stretched too wide. Their eyes twitched in ways too deliberate to be mistakes. At one point, the camera panned across the cartoon town, and every single background character stopped what they were doing. They all turned their heads, and they all looked straight at me. The screen lingered there, silent, for what felt like forever. Then the theme music returned abruptly, jarring and too loud, blasting me back into the illusion of normalcy. By then, my chest was tight, my palms sweaty against the armrest of the couch. I told myself to stop, to hit eject, to throw the tape back into its box and forget it existed. But I didn't. I couldn't. Something about it felt deliberate, purposeful. Like if I turned it off now, I'd miss the reason it had found me. And then, things got darker. The shift was almost imperceptible at first. One moment, the cartoon world was bouncing along with its usual rhythm, goofy antics, silly background music, and then something in the air seemed to warp, like the tape itself was holding its breath. The next scene began the same way countless others had. The main character walking down the street of his cheerful little town. Only this time, the town wasn't cheerful. The colors that had seemed muted before now looked wrong. Buildings sagged like they were melting, their windows slanted at impossible angles. The background, usually a looping sequence of cartoon storefronts and picket fences, stretched into an endless road lined with shadows that swayed as though alive. I blinked, convinced the tape was glitching, but the main character kept walking, oblivious, or pretending to be. The music cut out. Total silence. He stopped suddenly, mid-step, and turned his head toward me. Not just a glance this time. He looked straight at me, his pupils narrowing, his grin widening until it split unnaturally across his face. His voice, pitched low, distorted like the speakers were cracking, filled the room. "Why are you watching this?" I froze. My throat went dry. I actually checked the VCR remote, as if I'd accidentally unmuted some commentary track. But the words had synced with his mouth perfectly. He was speaking to me. I almost turned it off right then, but before I could move, the screen shifted again. The scene cut to the character's house. It was night now, though I don't remember the sun ever setting. The windows glowed with a dim, sickly light, and the air inside shimmered like heat rising off pavement. Other characters were there, sidekicks, neighbors, all the familiar faces, but they didn't act like themselves. They sat around the table, motionless, their smiles plastered in place, eyes wide and unblinking. The main character entered, dragging something behind him. It was just out of frame at first, scraping across the floor with a wet, grating sound. My stomach lurched when I realized what it was supposed to be, another version of himself. Same clothes, same body, but limp and lifeless, eyes gouged out and stitched shut with black thread. He laid the body on the table as though presenting dinner to his friends. The side characters didn't laugh. They didn't speak. They just stared, and for a brief second, the animation flickered. Their eyes weren't drawn anymore. They were real. Human eyes, filmed and superimposed onto their cartoon faces. I won't describe everything I saw in detail. Some of it still makes me feel sick to remember. I'll just say the characters began to take the body apart, piece by piece, with exaggerated cartoon motions that somehow didn't hide the realism of what was being shown. It was grotesque, deliberate, and the laugh track returned. Not cheerful giggles, but distorted shrieks looped over themselves, louder and louder, until it sounded like a crowd of people screaming. I covered my ears. I wanted to stop it, but I couldn't move. Something about the screen had me locked in place, like if I looked away, I'd miss something important, something meant for me. The episode spiraled from there. Characters began breaking the laws of their own universe. One stepped out of the background and walked toward the camera, growing larger until his face filled the entire screen. His lips moved, but the sound that came out wasn't his usual squeaky voice. It was layered whispers, overlapping, as though dozens of people were speaking at once. I could only make out a single phrase. You shouldn't be here. The world inside the cartoon began to collapse. Walls bent, gravity shifted. Characters floated, twisted, bent in ways the human body and animation cells shouldn't. At one point, the main character split into multiple copies, each distorted differently. One stretched too tall, another compressed into a fleshy ball, another with limbs bending backward. They screamed in unison before melting back into a single form. And the worst part? Every time I thought the scene had reached its breaking point, it would snap back to normal. A cheerful transition card, a goofy jingle, as though nothing had happened. For a few seconds, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, until the horror returned, sharper than before. There was one scene I'll never forget, no matter how much I try to push it from my mind. The main character stood in front of a mirror. His reflection didn't move with him. Instead, it stared directly at me, while he looked down, fidgeting nervously. Then, slowly, the reflection raised a finger to its lips, shushing me, before stepping out of the mirror entirely. That was the moment I realized the cartoon wasn't just broken. It was aware. The background characters began chanting something low and guttural, their mouths opening wider than their heads should allow. I couldn't understand the words, but I felt them reverberate in my chest, like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I wanted to stop. I wanted to end it. But my hand wouldn't move from the armrest. My body had become as frozen as those grinning side characters at the table. My eyes burned from refusing to blink, but I didn't dare look away. And then, after what felt like hours, the screen went black. No credits. No ending jingle. Just silence. I sat there in the dark, shaking, waiting for something, anything, to happen. My reflection in the TV screen stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed. And for a moment, I thought I saw another pair of eyes behind mine. That was when the static returned. The tape wasn't over. Not yet. For the first hour after it ended, I sat in silence. My TV screen was black, humming faintly, reflecting my own pale, wide-eyed face back at me. I told myself I'd imagined it, that I was overtired, that old VHS tapes always warped and flickered like that. But the lie didn't stick. Every time I replayed a frame in my head, I knew I hadn't imagined a thing. That night, sleep refused to come. When I finally drifted off, it wasn't rest, it was an ambush. My dreams were saturated with those distorted colors, those grins that stretched wider than they should. The main character's voice echoed through my head, warped and low. "Why are you watching this?" I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, convinced for a moment that someone was standing at the foot of my bed. The days that followed were worse. I'd sit in class, or at work, and catch movement out of the corner of my eye. A shadow stretching just a little too far across the floor. A face flickering in the reflection of a window, gone when I turned my head. My phone glitched constantly, messages scrambled, photos distorted into static. Once, when my screen froze, I swear I saw one of the cartoon's characters staring out from behind the pixels, lips moving silently. Nobody believed me. My roommate laughed when I told him, said I'd been binging too many horror forums. "It's probably one of those internet hoaxes," he said, waving me off. My family brushed it aside too. My mom told me to stop feeding myself scary garbage and focus on real life. Every dismissal felt like a shove deeper into isolation, but I couldn't shake it. The line between fiction and reality was breaking apart, and I was the only one who seemed to notice. I began searching, desperate for proof I wasn't alone. Forums, old threads, anywhere that might mention a lost tape. Buried deep in one discussion, I found a single comment that made my blood run cold. "If you've seen it, it's already too late. Most people who find a copy don't last long. Check the archives. You'll see." The user had deleted their account years ago, but in the forum's archive, I found fragments, posts about sleepless nights, about televisions turning on by themselves, about dreams where the characters called their names. None of the accounts were active anymore. It was like reading my own future. I tried to dismiss it, to claw my way back to normal life. I forced myself into routines. Wake up, go to work, come home, eat, sleep. But the cracks widened every day. The cartoon followed me. Static buzzed faintly in my headphones when I played music. Street signs seemed to warp as I passed, letters rearranging into words that didn't exist. Sometimes, I'd look at people in a crowd and swear their smiles lingered too long, their eyes twitching like cheap animation loops. One night, while brushing my teeth, I glanced up and froze. My reflection wasn't brushing its teeth. It was staring at me, lips curled into that stretched, unnatural grin I'd seen on the tape. When I blinked, it snapped back to normal, leaving me choking on toothpaste in fear. I stopped sleeping after that. I couldn't risk the dreams. And yet, despite everything, the terror, the hallucinations, the weight of knowing I was unraveling, I couldn't get rid of the tape. I tried once, carried it to the dumpster, and stood over the open lid. But the thought of letting it go made me nauseous, like I was about to throw away something vital, something I wasn't done with. I took it back inside. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just happening to me. The warnings, the rumors, the vanished accounts, they were breadcrumbs. Others had found copies. Others had watched. And if the posts were right, most of them hadn't survived long afterward. I wasn't the only one who saw it. That I thought finding that single archive post was the end of the trail, but it was only the beginning. The more I dug, the more the internet seemed to open like a trapdoor beneath me. At first, it was just obscure threads on old message boards, grainy screenshots, whispers about an unaired pilot, cryptic warnings buried in comment chains. But then I found entire hidden boards dedicated to lost media. Forums that weren't indexed by search engines, places you had to stumble into by accident or get invited to by someone who trusted you. There, the whispers grew louder. People weren't just talking about my cartoon. They listed dozens of others. Episodes that supposedly aired once in the middle of the night before vanishing, reels of film left abandoned in studio basements, animators who disappeared after working on certain projects. Each thread read like a conspiracy theory, but the consistency between them was unsettling. One user claimed to have worked at the very studio that made my cartoon. Their post was full of jargon and insider details, production schedules, animator nicknames, file naming conventions. Buried halfway down was a line that made my skin crawl. They called it the Black Reel. Every major studio has one. It's not supposed to be archived, but it always is. Someone higher up insists on it. Don't ever try to find it. Another post showed a blurry screenshot of an email chain. The subject line read, "Cleanup request, tape number 77. The body of the email was short, clinical, dispose securely. Reminder, final scene is not for external eyes. The replies were even worse. Some users claimed the tapes weren't just accidents, or edgy experiments. They said they were rituals, offerings disguised as entertainment. That certain frames, when played in sequence, were designed to do more than just tell a story. They were meant to open something, invite something. I wanted to dismiss it as paranoid rambling, but then I stumbled across a thread labeled simply, "Do not watch it to the end." The original poster uploaded grainy screenshots of a cartoon I instantly recognized, my cartoon. Only the frames weren't the same ones I'd seen. These showed parts one hadn't reached yet. Characters with their eyes blacked out. Symbols scrawled in the background. One screenshot showed a character pointing at the screen, mouth stretched in a scream, with the caption, "Too late now." When people asked where the poster had gotten the images, their account vanished. Threads locked. Users banned. It was like watching someone get erased in real time. The deeper I went, the clearer the pattern became. Every lost episode, rumor I'd ever heard of, those urban legends passed around online, seemed connected. A shared language of imagery, distorted laughter, looping screams, impossible colors, hidden symbols. And always, warnings to stop before the final scene. I should have stopped then. Shut my laptop, burned the tape, walked away. But by the time I connected the dots, I was in too deep. My curiosity had turned into obsession, and obsession is a cage you lock yourself into willingly. I told myself I was doing research, that I needed to know the truth. But the truth wasn't knowledge, it was bait. And I had already bitten down. By then, it was too late for me to stop watching that. I told myself I was only going to skim through it. Just enough to confirm what I'd seen before, to prove to myself that it wasn't changing on its own. But when I slid the tape back into the player, I felt that same sick weight in my stomach, like I'd just swallowed something sharp. The episode began the way it always had. The cheerful theme song, the bouncing colors, the characters marching across the screen in that familiar rhythm. But this time, the sound was warped from the start. The melody dragged, off-key, like it was being played on instruments that had rotted from the inside out. The characters' smiles twitched at the edges, too wide, too sharp, as if they were straining to hold their shapes together. I leaned closer, heart pounding. It wasn't just off, it was different. The background had shifted, details rearranged. And when the title card flickered on screen, the letters didn't spell the show's name anymore. They spelled mine. That was the moment I knew the tape wasn't just broken. It was watching me back. The story unfolded in ways I didn't remember, scenes stretched out, characters pausing in silence like they were waiting for me to react. Once, the main character stopped walking altogether, turned, and looked straight through the screen. His eyes weren't the bright, happy shapes I'd grown up with. They were black pits that pulled at me, dragging my thoughts into their void. And then he said my name. Clear as day. My real name. I froze, the remote slipping from my hand. The voice was wrong, layered, like a choir whispering in unison, but there was no mistaking it. He knew me. The episode spiraled after that. Scenes bled into each other, backgrounds looping like a nightmare that couldn't end. Characters glitched, breaking apart into static before reforming in grotesque shapes. Limbs bent wrong, faces sliding off like melting wax. And yet, beneath it all, I could still hear the faint remnants of the cheerful theme, playing like a lullaby for something rotten. At one point, the screen went black, and I thought the tape had finally broken. But then words appeared, white against the void. You shouldn't be here. I almost ripped the tape out then, but my body wouldn't listen. My eyes burned from not blinking, my muscles locked as if the screen itself had tethered me in place. The final scene began with all the characters standing in a circle, motionless. The background was gone, just endless static. One by one, their heads turned, necks snapping at unnatural angles, until they were all staring directly at me. And then the main character stepped forward. "Are you ready?" he asked. The screen split, static tearing it apart, and suddenly I was watching myself. Sitting on my couch, pale and shaking, eyes glued to the TV. Only in the reflection, my face was grinning, that horrible stretched grin I'd seen in the dreams, the one that didn't belong to me. The laughter started then, not just from the characters, from everywhere. It filled the room, echoed in my head, vibrating in my bones. High-pitched giggles layered with guttural growls, a symphony of joy and horror fused into one. I don't know how long it went on. Minutes? Hours? The tape looped back to the beginning eventually, the theme song chirping like nothing had happened. But it wasn't the same episode anymore. It never is. Every time, it shifts, molds itself tighter around me, like it's learning, like it's waiting for me to break. There was one last scene, though, the part one never should have let myself see. And if you're still here, if you're still listening, you'll regret hearing this. Because the last frame wasn't on the tape. It was in my head, and it's still playing, even now that I shouldn't have told you any of this. Maybe if I'd kept it buried, if I'd swallowed the memories and never let them out, it would have stayed with me alone. But secrets like this fester. They rot in the dark until they force their way into the open. And now, whether I meant to or not, I've dragged you into it with me. If you ever find a copy, on VHS, DVD, a corrupted file tucked inside some old hard drive, don't watch it. Don't even think about it. Burn it before it plays, and don't look back. Because once you've seen even a single frame, it doesn't let go. It learns your name, your face, your thoughts. It carves a space for itself inside your head, and it waits. I can feel it watching even now. The tape is sitting across the room, but I don't have to look at it to know it's awake. The static hum isn't in the speakers anymore. It's in the walls, in the silence between my heartbeats. Sometimes, when I blink, I see flashes of that grin, stretched wider and wider, as though it's trying to climb through the cracks in my eyelids. You think I'm exaggerating? That I've lost it? Maybe you're right. Or maybe you're just hearing this too late. Because here's the thing no one says in those old forum posts. The part that always gets cut off before you can read the rest. The episode doesn't spread by accident. It spreads through stories, through warnings, through people like me who can't help but whisper about the shadows in the frames. The more you hear, the closer it gets. The more you picture it, the sharper it becomes. That's why they scrub the forums. That's why users vanish after posting screenshots. It isn't just censorship, it's containment. Damage control. They know the danger isn't in watching the tape. It's in remembering it. So maybe I've doomed you. Maybe by listening this far, you've already given it a foothold. Maybe when your screen flickers, when your headphones buzz, when you wake up at 3:17 a.m. with laughter echoing faintly in the dark, you'll know. I tried to fight it. I really did. I told myself I'd resist, that I'd cut it off before it consumed me completely. But it's stronger than I am. Stronger than any of us. And it doesn't want to be forgotten. If this is the last thing I ever record, let it be a warning, or maybe just a confession. Don't search for it. Don't try to prove me wrong. Don't let curiosity sink its claws into you the way it did to me. And if the screen flickers after this video ends, don't look at it. Static crackles. Silence.